G'day everyone and welcome to Brushes with Beck. In today's video I'm going to be using my Faber-Castell Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils on this Strathmore toned blue mixed media paper. Now as you can see this is 6 by 8 inches in size and I've just transferred over a sketch of my Eclectus Parrot Dory. Now my main goal for trying these pencils on a toned paper is I wanted to see if I could get some rich colours, because watercolours are transparent and so the colour from the toned paper is obviously going to show through, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to get that richness of colour or some of the brighter colours that I wanted on a toned paper. So this piece is really an experimental piece to try that out and see how well it works and what sort of result I can achieve. And now if you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that I have used the Strathmore toned blue mixed media in the past. I have used it for some coloured pencil work, and I have also used a gouache paint on it, the water-based gouache. Now, this paper holds paint and water very, very well, but I didn't know how it would go with layering lots of layers of coloured pencil and repeatedly wetting those layers and then going over with the coloured pencil again. If you want to see a couple of those videos that I've done in the past, I'll leave them up in the cards above. And if you are enjoying this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up, comment down below and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell button while you're at it so you can be notified of every upload from me. So as you can see, as I'm working through this piece, I started in with a base layer, a couple of different red tones and a blue tone just to set my colour scheme in and to get an idea. I went in quite light, but I wasn't sure how rich the colour was going to be first up, and with watercolour it's always better to start lighter and work your way to dark, because that's just how they work. So I'm just repeatedly building up layers as you do with regular coloured pencil, and I'm being pretty messy as you can see, because when I'm using the paintbrush to blend it out, pretty much all of that texture just disappears. So it's pretty easy to block in some quick layers and layer up the colour to make it stronger and richer. I did have trouble getting the red on the head to be the colour tone that I wanted, but I just had to keep building up those layers, as I said, and deepening that colour over the top of the toned paper. Obviously I didn't have any trouble with the blue because it is sort of a toned blue paper, and so I didn't have any trouble with that affecting the colour of the blue. Now her beak is black, and you will see once I went in very, very light to begin with because I couldn't remember how dark the black. I thought it would come out quite a bit darker. And when you wet it, originally it is quite a little bit darker than the pencil you've laid in, but it dries very pale. And that's something to note, and why it's very important to have a good colour chart reference of both wet and dry of your watercolour pencils. So you can refer to that and see, okay, how do these pencils dry how do these pencils dry once they've been wet compared to the dry swatch before it's been wet. So my colour chart came in very handy and allowed me to just throw down colours without thinking about it too much because I already knew what the result was going to be. Obviously it's going to be a little bit different because it's toned paper, but for the most part, fairly predictable results in that sense. So as I said, I'm still building up layers. I don't have enough colour down yet. For me, the colour isn't rich enough. And I'm working through some of the dark areas on the head because I realised it was just too plain. There wasn't enough contrast in there and enough sort of values and variance in tone there. So I had to add some, I think it was Delft blue, which is slightly more of a purple blue in there, as well as a darker red as well, just to really boost those subtle shadows and give some depth to that head rather than it just being all one colour. Now unfortunately with my lighting it has reflected off of this image a little bit, so it's a bit washed out compared to what it actually is. but you can see that the color is really starting to come through, and now I'm starting to work in more particular areas, detailing in that eye, which turned out really, really lovely, before going back into the beak. Now, when you're using watercolor pencils, it's very important to remember that once you have wet an area, you must allow it to dry completely before going back in with your pencil. I mean, you can go back in when it's still damp, but you very much risk damaging the paper unless you use a very, very gentle touch. So before you do another crazy layer in, like you see me scribbling in, the paper must be dry or you will damage that paper. Even with the paper dry, I did have some trouble. I felt like I was damaging the paper and sort of indenting it a little bit too much, just trying to get the strength of the pigment down that I wanted. And I'm not sure whether that was the pencils not sort of gripping, the paper not gripping these pencils that well, so they're simply not applying as much pigment as I'm used to, or whether it's a matter of I'm sort of wearing down the paper with the number of layers I've done and then wetting and allowing it to dry and re-wetting it again. So it did have some limitations in that sense. I had to be careful as I built up the layers not to indent the paper too much. But I didn't have the paper pulling up at all or tearing, and it was very, very sturdy in that sense, and I had no troubles with the paper disintegrating or anything like that. It held up very, very well. I was just worried about, like I said, indenting it. So working through the final details now, because I feel like I've got enough colour built up. I've got my lights and my shadows where I want them to be. And I'm just trying to add in, I'm not being super thorough with detail. I'm not being accurate with the detail. I'm just trying to add some texture and a bit more depth to the picture. Because at the moment it's quite loose, it's messy, there's no definition to it. And apart from the beak and the eye, and I just want to add some of those little fine details just to refine it a little bit and make it look a bit more polished. So of course I've allowed it to dry completely before going in. I'm still using my Albrecht Durer Watercolor pencils, and I've just sharpened them to a nice fine point so that I can get those fine details in. Now, eclectus feathers on their heads are more like fur. They're very fine little feathers, like a single strand type of thing. They're not like a traditional feather type. So that's why you see me just drawing in those little strands there that look like little bits of fur, just to get some texture and depth into that area. And I used the white to add in my highlights over the blue and red areas, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised at how well that laid over the top, because the Faber-Castell Polychromos white is traditionally quite transparent. And so with this smoother texture paper and having done so many layers of color, I didn't actually think I was going to get any white in over the top here, but it worked absolutely beautifully, just the way I wanted it to, and it helped add in some really nice depth and texture to the feathers. So I'm just going in over the beak again because I felt it wasn't quite dark enough. I just cannot get this black as dark as I would like, and filling that in. And once I've gone over it with the water and let it dry again, I then also went in with the black pencil dry and didn't re-wet it, just to refine, really add some pigments into those black areas. So as you can see, that's pretty much the finished piece. You can see I got some really beautiful rich colors on this piece with the Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils on the toned paper. That's the Strathmore mixed media toned blue paper. It turned out really well, and I'm extremely pleased with it. I honestly didn't think the result would be as good as it is. I thought I might have trouble really layering color over that toned paper, but it really worked out. I hope you've enjoyed this video and gotten something out of it. Once again, please like the video and comment down below. Tell me, have you ever used watercolor pencils on toned paper like this? Did you like it? Do you think the results are worth it? Let me know down in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next week for another video. Stay creative.